Nervous about the volatility of public markets? Looking to invest in Canadian real estate but not finding the right opportunities? Neighborhood Holdings may be an option. Nearly 10 years of consistent performance, Neighborhood aims to provide stable income while preserving invested capital, target net yield above 8%. At the heart of the strategy is Neighborhood's mortgage product portfolio of first position 100% residential mortgages across Canada with an average loan to value under 55%. Neighborhood partners with mortgage brokers and financial institutions to support quality borrowers in transition who may not currently qualify for traditional financing and have a temporary need for capital. Neighborhood's portfolio has no exposure to commercial, construction, or bare land properties, is geographically diversified across major urban and suburban centers in Canada. Check out the links in the description or visit neighborhoodholdings.com to view the offering memorandum for investors and advisors or to explore mortgage broker partnership opportunities. This is not advice. Please consult a professional advisor before investing a Looney in any of these investments. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that this information discussed today is not intended to be or construed as investment advice. Please consult a professional advisor before putting a Looney in any of these financial markets.
The dirty secret is that no one's ever going to get paid back.
People have the shortest memories when it comes to investment.
We just got to get Keith into Bitcoin.
Hey, there's a bubble.
Welcome back to the Loonie Hour, episode 214. As always, joined by the three amigos, Boomer over in Halifax, Keith Dicker, Rich Diaz, Montreal. What's going on?
There's too much snow is what's going on. It's been snowing. It's November 12th, by the way.
You got any pond hockey going right now?
Dude, I play in the Executive Westmount B League for over 40s, and I'm one of the best players on the ice. And the average age is like 60 years old.
Man, you couldn't pay me to go watch that.
There's actually a quick story. There's actually a guy named, I won't give him his name, but he's 73 years old, and the bugger plays like every week. And he's a defenseman, and he doesn't back.
Just laying out, blocking shots.
He's amazing. Honestly, he's like
Face
genuinely,
first.
he's like an inspiration. 73 years old, plays hockey at least once a week. Pretty cool. Anyway, that's it.
Keith?
That's not bad. Well, I think you guys know I live close to one of the universities there. This is Canadian University Bowl season. And the St. Mary's Huskies, they won the Vanier Cup last week. And now they're playing the UTEC Bowl against Montreal, Rich. These guys are coming down from Montreal. So last week's game, it was, the wind was probably 80 kilometers an hour and the rain was flying and the place was packed. And when I go to the game over there, I like to, I don't sit in the
Left
bleachers.
your house?
I like this stuff. Because so I like, instead of sitting in the bleachers, I like to follow the line of scrimmage up and down the sideline. So you get you can see what's happening. But when the other team scores a touchdown, of course, you kick your point after. And that one end zone is open. So I used to always stand back in the end zone deep. And I was catching the point after kick.
Wow. They let you walk the sideline? That's pretty cool.
Well, I'm not right up on the sideline. But,
Okay. With a clipboard, with a little clipboard. And
but I was catching the point after. Oh, that was fun. Anyway, this Saturday, it's a big one. So it's the Montreal. So Montreal and Laval have played in the finals for the Quebec League 17 of the last 19 years.
Yikes.
Only 4 teams.
That doesn't
How is that even?
Yeah.
I know, it's crazy. Anyway, come on down, guys. Come and see it. Watch Boomer catch the ball in the end zone.
Just take it from the little kids.
What's going on, Steve? What's new with Loonie Hour?
Not much. We got an investor series coming up on December. So it's a new, we've done a lot of meetups in the past. We've done live podcasts. So we have a new event series we're putting on. It's like a trial run here. It's called the Loonie Hour Investor Series. We're effectively, so Ben Rabideau is going to be joining as well. It's in Toronto at, Rich, where is it again?
Toronto Cricket Club.
Toronto Cricket Club, December 2nd. There's tickets in the link in the description below. But effectively, it's going to be a presentation on global markets. Keith and Ben are going to share, slide decks. Keith's going to talk about positioning portfolios, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, for all the times that we live in today. So a little bit of a different format, but it'll be, you know, the ability to come out, have a couple drinks, some food, you know, shake hands, meet, and ultimately, learn about markets. So
There'll be a test at the end. No, no joking. There will not be a test at the end. But I think what a lot of people, when we do these meet and greets, you know, a lot of people actually just expect, I don't know if expect is the right word, but they're often curious about our thoughts on specific issues. And to their credit, you know, some of them take notes and when they come to our shows. And I think we got a lot of requests to talk about specifics and sort of present stuff. And I think that that's sort of where this is the genesis of this sort of new event comes from. And so, yeah, we'll see. I think it'll be really fun. There will not be a test, but we will present our views in a more technical and more specific way.
So December 2nd, Toronto Cricket Club. Tickets in the show notes below to an Eventbrite page where you can grab tickets. Yeah, we've got a decent amount of chat. Oh, by the way, people have been asking about, so like the great thing about like the podcast and obviously like having the media platform now is like you have a lot of people that reach out and a lot of people that are willing to share information. It's created a vast network for us, which has been a huge blessing and really like, yeah. So the number of like lawyers that have reached out, people with backgrounds in Aboriginal studies, lenders, appraisers,
Minors.
the whole works. And so just kind of following this Richmond, Kamloops, First Nations land claims stuff. It's been interesting. So just an update on that stuff. Sort of what we're hearing through our contacts is pretty much most of the lenders now are not lending on those contested lands. It's a no-go today. And we're hearing that, yeah, it is a real big issue with the lawyers that we chat with. There's a lot of sort of misunderstandings and misinterpretations of what this means, especially from some of the journalists that are sort of downplaying the implications and what it means ultimately for property holders, investment dollars, liquidity, the inability to get financing, new financing. I think should not be understated. So.
Maybe if there's anyone in the audience who knows of directly of any real estate transactions that were just about to close or just about to get started, maybe they can share that with us on an email. Because I'm really curious, because at some point in time, someone must have got tripped up and they were almost at the finish line with it. So it'd be good to hear what's happening.
So I grew up in Richmond. I think that's pretty well known now for anyone that's been following the podcast. But I actually know, I mean, Richmond's just like, you know, growing up there your whole life, it's almost becomes like a small town. So I actually know a lot of the landowners that have been impacted. You know, some of the farmlands and the industrial lands and the families that own those sites. Yeah, so just kind of hearing their stories as well firsthand and kind of what they're experiencing and going through. So yeah, I don't think it should be understated. But yeah, I mean, lots else to talk about, Keith. This week we have the U.S. government reopening. We've got some discussions around 50-year mortgages I kind of want to discuss. Canada job numbers last week, some data coming out of the U.K., Bank of Canada deliberations. So there's a lot more to chat about this week, but we actually have a special guest coming on first, and that is basically related to the auto sector. So we have Brian Kingston, who's president and CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, representing Ford, GM, and Stellantis in Canada. Previously, he was vice president of policy and international at the Business Council of Canada and held senior roles across federal departments, including finance, global affairs, and Privy Council office. He's a past president of the Ottawa Economics Association, and he's the current Banff Forum board member and holds degrees in economics from Carleton International Affairs. Jesus, Rich, you sent me this the longest bio of all time.
I actually used ChatGPT to shorten it.
But anyways,
I like the Banff board. That was kind of hard to say.
Yeah, that is hard to say.
Anyway, guys, the point is Brian knows the stuff about the Canadian auto sector and industry,
right.
and we've been really excited to speak with him for, I think it was a couple of weeks ago. We originally had a plan, and then the budget started coming up and things. So this is going to be a great conversation, just to really have the three babbling turds figure out what's really happening with the auto sector.
Yeah, I think it's like that. I don't want people to turn off. I'm like, well, I'm not interested in cars. We're not going to be talking about the Ford Mustang. We're going to be talking about what's happening with the auto sector, the tariffs. Obviously, the auto sector has a huge component to Canada's GDP. So what are the implications today moving forward? EVs, China EV bans, the geopolitics behind that. So we're gonna pull on a lot of threads today. So I think it should be a really insightful convo, and then obviously we'll jump back over to the global macro things that are impacting all of us today. So without further ado, let's bring in Brian right now. Brian, welcome to the Loonie Hour.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
First appearance. We've heard good things, so no pressure.
I won't disappoint.
Rich, I'm sure you're dying to start things off here with the first question, so I'll let you chime in.
Yeah, sure. My question is between Stellantis, Ford, and GM. What's your favorite car company?
Oh, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. One of the perks of the job is I do get to drive different vehicles from all the manufacturers. So right now I'm in an F-150 Lightning.
Okay,
I
cool.
absolutely love it. So
no, in all seriousness, I think before we get into the weeds, I just what exactly do you do for them, and why is your role necessary, especially right now? And then then we'll ask sort of more interesting questions, but just lay the groundwork of what you do, what your association does, and why it's important right now specifically.
Yeah, well, CVMA, Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, has been around for 100 years. So we're just about to celebrate that anniversary next year. And what we do is we bring companies together and try and develop aligned positions on policies that will ultimately make this sector succeed. And if you look at Ford, GM, and Stellantis, I mean, they've been building cars in this country for 120 years and making huge contributions to communities across Canada. So we're ultimately here to make sure that Canada is competitive for new automotive investment and that this sector is set up to continue to contribute to the Canadian economy. Obviously, right now, given all of the challenges that we're facing with respect to tariffs and this EV transition, our role is more important than ever because government needs advice. They need help on how to actually implement policies and make sure that we're set up for success. And so we're busier than ever, to say the least.
So speaking of governments listening to people like you, I mean, would you say that they do listen to you on, let's just start with EV mandates. It's something we've talked a lot about before. We actually had an expert from the Dallas Federal Reserve who basically has committed his entire life to studying the feasibility of EVs on the show. But what is your perspective as a sort of mouthpiece for these larger companies? I mean, is it profitable? Is it not profitable? Does it make sense? Why or why not?
Yeah, I mean, look, we know the transition is going to happen because it is a better technology than internal combustion engine vehicles. So this is going to happen. It's not going to happen as quickly as governments expected it would occur. And so right now it's not profitable. If you look at the manufacturers and their quarterlies, when they report on what it's costing to build out these supply chains and sell these vehicles, many of the vehicles are being sold at a loss because the market just simply isn't there yet. But we know long term, this is the direction the industry is going. And we see from consumers when they do make the switch, and if they are set up to drive an EV, if they have home charging, if they have the public charging that they need, they love it. They love the transition. They love the technology. But our issue from the get-go has always been you can't mandate a new technology. And we see this in every sector of the economy. Governments get way ahead of themselves on this, thinking that they can mandate consumer behavior. And, just look at the recent sales trend. I mean, 6 months of decline, it's not happening. So you can't force it.
What do
You
you
mentioned
think?
that you.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, just to chime in there. You mentioned, Brian, that you drive the Ford F-150. Am I correct here in ChatGPT suggesting they lose close to 100,000 per truck currently?
I think that's a little bit high, but Ford does break out their earnings for their electric operation, and they have been posting significant losses overall as they've invested in this. They're having to create a whole new supply chain, new facilities, new manufacturing plants, battery capacity. So right now, there are very few automakers that are profitable in the EV space. Different story if you look at China, where the subsidization is absolutely massive. But here in North America, this is still a money-losing endeavor.
We'll circle back to China in a sec.
Yeah.
Rich, go ahead.
No, I was just wondering. So I mean, again, I've been against the EV mandate, but can you just like lay out why you think EVs are sort of an inevitability?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of reasons. First of all, the technology itself is really phenomenal, right? If you're driving an EV, you benefit from a much more efficient powertrain. Acceleration's phenomenal. You can charge it at home, which again, it doesn't apply to everybody. And this has been one of our challenges with the mandate. If you live in a multi-unit residential building, good luck charging your vehicle in your parkade. It's not going to happen. But if you have the ability to charge at home, it's hugely convenient. And it's extremely cost effective. I mean, I take advantage of Ontario has an ultra low overnight electricity rate. We're talking dollars to charge your vehicle up to 100%. So it's extremely convenient. And that's why I believe that this is the direction we're heading. And if you look at markets around the world, North America is unique. We drive long distances, we have cold weather, and people like to do a lot of things like, I don't know, towing boats, sea-doos, ski-doos, you name it. So it makes the conditions here a bit unique. But if you look globally, electrification is taking off. It's accelerating at an extremely rapid pace. So I'm convinced that's where we're heading, but not by 2035.
And so get back on this mandate. So you've made, when they did this mandate, did they consult with you guys? Did they say, here's what we want to do? And then, you and your bosses and your colleagues were like, what the hell did you not tell them that it was ridiculous and was never going to happen? And did they ignore you? What's the conversation like? Like, give us like an insight into this world for us.
Oh, don't get me started. Look, we've been talking to government about this for the better part of 5 years, and from the get-go have said, don't do this. This is a bad policy because it is not technology neutral. You need technology neutral policies. If the government's objective is this, if they say we want to reduce emissions, well, they have regulations that can do that. There's tailpipe emissions that require automakers to reduce the overall emissions of their fleet. And they do that. If you look at the history back to 2011, and the government has tightened those emissions every single year, those standards, we've delivered a 48% reduction in emissions in the passenger vehicle fleet. And it's through a range of policies, not through simply forcing electrification. So we've been telling the government we're not ready for this level of sales. It's too costly. The infrastructure isn't there. Canadian consumers aren't there. And we were frankly ignored. And the government went ahead anyway with this 100% target. And, just to give you a sense of how badly it's going, this regulation is only in place now. It just came into force for the 2026 model year, where the government said 20% EV sales. We're currently sitting at 8.8% sales, and we're in the very first year of this reg. So failure to launch. It's broken before it's even gotten started. And I think the government should just now say, okay, look, we've made a mistake here. Let's get rid of this.
So with that,
go ahead, Keith.
My turn. Thank you. Brian, with this 20% of sales mandate for next calendar year, that's what's coming up.
Yeah, so it's the 2026 model year, but we're actually in the 2026 model year right now. Oh, the model year. Manufacturers. Okay. Yeah.
So what's the penalty then for not hitting that target? Who pays? Well, I know we all pay the penalty, of course, eventually. But how is it enforced? Like, do you guys get a knock on the door and say, hey, you guys didn't produce, here's your fine?
Yeah, well, this is where it gets really wild. So the regulation is under CEPA, which is criminal legislation, very inflexible environmental legislation that the federal government uses. And so what happens if a company can't get to that mandated sales target? They have two options. Option one is they approach another manufacturer who happens to have surplus credits and is willing to sell them. There is really only one manufacturer with surplus
Can we guess?
And you can guess who that might be.
Evil Elon Musk.
There you go. So you have this bizarre situation where manufacturers in Canada that employ Canadians, tens of thousands of Canadians, are cutting checks to Tesla so that they can comply with a federal government regulation. Our estimate is that just between now and 2030, you will have to contract at least $3 billion from Tesla to meet the government mandated target. So that's option one. Option two is you have to balance the equation. And what I mean by that is your sales mix has to hit that 20% EV. So there is one way to get there without selling the required number of EVs. You can restrict your sales of internal combustion engine vehicles. According to,
by the way, this is now Loonie Hour math. Like we're all going.
Yes. Okay, it gets crazier. So on the current forecast that we're looking at out to 2030, if the government doesn't get rid of this thing, manufacturers will have to pull between 700 and 900,000 internal combustion engine vehicle sales from the market every year. That would be economic devastation. I mean, that's dealerships that have no product to sell, manufacturers that have no product to produce. Costs will go up, of course, for Canadians massively because the vehicles won't be there.
Used car prices go up.
Used car prices go up. And one of the bizarre outcomes here is if this is all about emissions reductions, another impact is that Canadians will hang on to their clunkers. So if you're driving that 1985 pickup truck that is probably not overly good when it comes to an emissions output, you're now going to be incentivized to hang on to that thing forever. So this is where the regulation will take us, and that's how government will enforce it.
I mean,
so I'm sensing the enthusiasm with this. Okay, so how does it? I mean, obviously this is going to change. I mean, they must be listening to your group and others as well. And I imagine at some point very soon there'll be an announcement late Friday night. It'll come out or something like that. Are you hearing that they're closer to that level, or even from the ground up? I mean, are you hearing manufacturers or dealerships saying, hey, we're screwed here, like this doesn't work unless it's changed?
Yes. I mean, I think there is now a recognition by everybody that this is a failed policy and it needs to change. And the fact that the Prime Minister paused it for 2026, that was announced in September, and initiated a 60-day review of the mandate that just ended. So we're waiting for the results of that review. Now, my fear is that they just make tweaks on the margins and say, okay, maybe we'll reduce the targets a little bit, introduce some more flexibilities. None of that helps because we don't actually know where consumer demand is going, and trying to forecast year-over-year EV uptake is very challenging. So government could change the targets, but I guarantee you, I will be back speaking with government in 2 years saying, your latest target is not feasible. You cannot mandate consumer behavior, and that's what the government hasn't quite figured out yet.
Brian, what's your personal opinion on sort of EV adoption? Like, I'm in Vancouver. I drive an EV. I think it's like the land of Teslas. Like, I think every third car is like a Tesla. It's insane. So clearly that works. We have cheap hydro here for now. But like, I think a lot about like rural Canada, right? Which is like, it's really cold. These EVs don't perform that well yet in extreme weather. And yeah, they don't have the same infrastructure, obviously. So like, what's the thought process there? Like, what are your counterparts saying as well?
Yeah, look, it totally depends on where you live. And if we look at the EV sales figures across Canada, no surprise, uptake is highest in high-income urban neighborhoods. And typically what you saw is a lot of people initially, the early adopters, you got a Range Rover, you've got a BMW, and then your third vehicle is an EV. Well, that's very different than a middle-income household with one vehicle that has to do everything, including driving to hockey practice, visiting family on the other side of the province. They're going to want to make sure that that one vehicle is capable of doing everything they need it to do. And right now, an EV is probably not going to be their preferred choice. So yeah, we've got to get the infrastructure right. First of all, that's been frankly a disaster in terms of the rollout. We're sitting at about 35,000 public chargers, and the government, it's their own estimates. This isn't a number I came up with. They said that we need 100,000 chargers this year, and we're sitting at 35. So, the gaps are massive. And for rural Canadians, the challenges are even more significant, particularly if you live in a colder part of Canada. You've got long driving distances. you are not going to make the switch until you know that the vehicle is capable of doing everything that the equivalent gas vehicle can do for you. And we're just not quite there yet. So you're going to see variations in uptake. And again, this is why mandating it makes absolutely no sense. We want consumers to make the switch because they want to make the switch. Typically, when government tries to force something, you get blowback, and that's what we're seeing right now.
Well, in Soviet Canada, government choose you. My question, just sticking with EVs, but shifting a little bit to China, is like, I mean, BYD is massively subsidized by the Chinese government. It's obviously a strategic, strategically important decision from top down. They're eating the Germans for lunch. Do American / Canadian auto manufacturers have a chance? I mean, can you compete against, the might of the Chinese industrial complex?
We can compete with anyone, but it has to be a level playing field. And it is absolutely not a level playing field when you're talking about Chinese EVs. And like, just to give you an example of what they've done here. So China made a very clear decision years ago as part of their industrial policy. They said, we are going to become a global player in EV manufacturing. They've put about 230 billion US dollars in direct subsidy into this sector. And they're following a very similar model that they've used for steel, aluminum production, solar panels.
Shipping.
I call it scale, dump, destroy. They scale an industry through massive domestic subsidization. Then they take the overcapacity. Right now, China has enough EV capacity to satisfy their own domestic demand 3 times over. So there's huge, huge oversupply. So they take that capacity, they dump it into foreign markets at below market prices. They then take market share and destroy the domestic industry there. And then you end up being dependent on China for this production. So we've seen this play out many times before. Why on earth would we allow the Chinese to do that to our automotive industry? It makes no sense. Also, that people can have, cheaper EVs. I'm always amazed by the environmental community and the Yango lobby in Canada that's pushing for Chinese EVs. They completely ignore Chinese labor practices, environmental practices, all because they simply want a cheaper EV. It's frankly insane that that's even being a consideration right now. We can't let them in. We should never let them in.
So, Brian, I have a quick question for you because people will push back and say, well, like here in Canada, like we're subsidizing, some of these EV manufacturers or battery plants, for example. Like, what's the difference? Can you kind of just parse out the two?
Absolutely. I get that question a lot. And yes, we absolutely do subsidize automotive in North America. And you saw it through the Inflation Reduction Act, some of the production subsidies that were put in place in Canada to attract battery manufacturing. The difference is scale. China does this at a scale that no country in the world would ever attempt to match. The 230 billion US dollars is it just pales in comparison to what you see in North America. And people, frankly, the populace would never support this idea of massive overcapacity and scaling through government subsidies. So yes, there's support for the industry here, but it's nowhere close to what China does.
Do you see them removing the 100% EV tariff? Tariffs are only bad when Donald Trump does them. When Canada does them, they're somehow good. But anyway, but seriously, and a serious thing, do you see the pressure coming from the opposite side of the argument?
There's definitely pressure there. And look, China is very savvy in how they've positioned this. They're pitting Canadians against each other. So they have retaliated, and they've done it very cleverly by retaliating on products that come out of Western Canada. And our agricultural products in particular, so canola. And so you're seeing pressure on government to try and reverse this so that canola farmers can access that market. We cannot allow ourselves to get sucked into that game. Very dangerous. China is not a reliable trading partner. And just remember, a couple of years ago, they scooped up Canadians off the street and put them in prison. We can't, just because we have challenges with the United States, does not mean that we should be running to Beijing and trying to create a new relationship with China. They will pull that lever on canola or any other export whenever they feel the need to put pressure on Canada. I don't think the government will change stance on this for a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, we're in a very sensitive discussion with the Americans right now on trying to get rid of tariffs, trying to renew our CUSMA trade agreement. If Canada were to suddenly announce, hey, you know what, we're going to take a different approach, we're going to get closer to China, That would be very, very negatively perceived by Washington, and I think it will cause big issues for us. And secondly, the industrial argument is well understood. Our industry is under a great deal of pressure right now. If you allow Chinese vehicles into the market, it's going to only exacerbate those challenges. And the last thing I'll note, and not my area of expertise, but there are real security concerns with Chinese EVs. The US has put in place a ban on Chinese connected vehicle software because it turns out that the information gathered from these vehicles can be accessed and controlled in a foreign country. Just look at what's happened in Israel. Israel has arguably some of the best cybersecurity defenses in the world. They have just banned BYD vehicles from driving near military facilities and being used by government because they've realized that these are being used to collect sensitive information. So, if you don't believe the industrial arguments or the need for US alignment, at a very minimum, this presents a real national security concern, and we cannot open that door to these vehicles.
Well, I'll say a few things you may not want to cuddle into at night. So first of all, the whole somebody might capture our data and stuff like that. That's going to happen anyway. Whether it's the Chinese or the Americans or whoever. I mean, that's going to happen. And then the other comment, it's not a question. Maybe we don't need to be in the EV business. That's just me. We can take that investment, reallocate it to something else in our economy that can create X times number of jobs, something we could be really good at instead of a money losing proposition. Maybe we can just rely totally on the Americans and their EV industry. But I do have a question. It is coming back to that. That was my little comment. Does Ottawa still have a less favorable approach or attitude towards the Teslas because of Musk and his political associations? Because I know, so and like Steve said, every fourth car is an EV where you are.
Fourth or third. There's so many Teslas in the city here. I'm guilty of driving one myself. I think it's a great car. I mean, to your point, Brian. I mean, going from like an EV vehicle to a gas feels almost archaic at this stage, but. I mean, it's funny. Yeah, Keith, I mean, to your point, I've driven a Tesla for years and years. It was only in the last 12, 18 months where people start going, oh, you're driving one of those? I think it was because of the political sort of stigma around Elon Musk.
So in Halifax, I bet you there might be 5 Teslas in the whole city. I'm not joking. This is not a big EV town. However, at least 4 of them have the little "I don't like Elon Musk" stickers on their car as well. And these things just don't reconcile. It's like they just miss with because the whole reason for going to EV is because of the climate argument and all that. Yet it comes down to now, data security, creating jobs and investment. And if the world is going to roll up into a ball of fire, who cares who's making money on it? Do you see what I mean? But back to the Tesla question, is that bantered about when you guys have discussions? Is it, you do the Heisman, move away from Tesla, or is that not as important and it's going to get, you get a credit for buying them online?
Well, let me address your first point, just about do we need to be in this business, and then I'll talk about the Tesla factor. Just the reason why it is so important that we have an auto industry, in particular in this transition to EV, is because we happen to have one of the largest endowments of natural resources required for next generation EV batteries. This was always the vision of, if we can connect our auto sector to our mining industry, the economic benefits for Canada are massive. And the reason for that is because right now, the battery supply chain, 80% of it is controlled by China. 90% of rare earth minerals are controlled and processed by China. There is only one country in the world where you could produce at levels needed to reduce that dependency on China, and that's right here in Canada. We've done a great job of talking about it, but we've done a very poor job of actually moving to permit mines, build processing facilities, and position ourselves as the supplier of choice. Countries are looking for these minerals and they don't want them from China. So it would be just ludicrous for us not to take advantage of this opportunity and build out a battery supply chain, and all the better if we can connect it to manufacturing facilities right here. So that's why I think we have to be in the business. It's not just about auto. Like, this is a generational economic driver if we can get these resources out of the ground. To your point on Tesla, they've created issues for themselves, frankly, and there is a negative perception, in particular because of what was done with respect to the IZEV program, which is a consumer purchase incentive that the federal government was using to boost EV sales. And the way it worked is you'd go buy an EV and then you could apply for this $5,000 incentive from government. And the program was running out of money. And when they announced that that was happening, Tesla jumped the queue and basically claimed all of the remaining incentive money. And it was very, very questionable how this occurred. And the government looked at that and said, well, hold on, we're trying to support this industry here in Canada. We're putting all these investments into our battery supply chain. And Teslas that at the time were being made in China are benefiting from all of these public funds. So that was hugely damaging to their reputation and approach in this country. And on top of that, the EV mandate, they're the biggest beneficiaries of it. If you look at Tesla's quarterly earnings, I think last quarter they booked about $400 million in regulatory credit. So it's part of the business, right? You convince governments to put in place mandates, and then you ultimately create a revenue line because you're collecting these funds from other manufacturers. So it's very self-defeating Canadian policies that we can get in front of, and we definitely shouldn't be benefiting a company that does very little here in Canada.
Does Tesla, sorry to interrupt, does Tesla still manufacture in China today? Is that?
They do, but because of the tariff, they had to change their supply chain. And so now they service Canada out of Europe and the United States.
Okay.
My question is just a little bit so different. I mean, you almost convinced me on the EV battery things. We'll have to have you on in a little while to dissect that a little bit. I mean, I've been of the view that Canada should open up every single mine possible, and it's basically just self-defeating. That's a conversation for a different day. My question is, we hear a lot of navel gazing and hand wringing over Donald Trump's coming after the Canadian auto industry. Can you unpack, from your perspective, what it is America, what does Donald Trump want? Tell us, Brian. Tell Canada what Donald Trump wants. No, I'm joking, but there is a serious question underneath that, which is, what exactly is sort of the end game from the American perspective with respect to the auto manufacturing in Canada?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that they want more manufacturing in the United States. And if you look at everything from the measures in the One Big Beautiful Bill through to the tariff policy, this is all aimed at reshoring manufacturing. Where I think we get things a little bit wrong in Canada is when we hear things like, we don't want your cars, we want your industry. We have to remember that this is a negotiation. Just like the last time on CUSMA, a lot of things get said. You cannot react immediately to them. You've got to get to the table and hammer out a deal. And I remain convinced of the view that we will get an agreement and there will be a Canadian automotive industry, because it is in America's interest for that to occur. And the reason I say that is the US sends a lot of vehicles outside of America. And where do you think their number one destination is? It's Canada. And it's not even close. The US sends more vehicles to Canada than to China, Mexico, and Germany combined, the next three biggest export destinations. And in particular, they send vehicles that their real specialty is in, which is in larger SUVs and pickup trucks. You don't find a market for F-150s and Rams and Silverados in Europe or in Asia. People just don't, for obvious reasons, right?
What do you mean?
That's not what people drive. But what's the number one selling vehicle in Canada year after year? It's an F-150. So we're a big, important market for the US. When you look at our production, it's not as though Canada, if you look back to the early 2000s, we were producing far more vehicles, but we're sitting at about 1.3 million cars a year. So you can't make the argument that we are over-indexed on manufacturing, and in fact, we're taking jobs away from America. So there is a landing zone here that is mutually beneficial, that ensures that Canada keeps a footprint, the US continues to access the Canadian market, and we all benefit from the economies of scale. Like, the reason we negotiated the Canada-US FTA, NAFTA, and CUSMA is because it was clear that it's better if we can all sell and build together into a market of 20 million vehicles instead of dividing ourselves up into Canada, US, and Mexico and being far more inefficient as a result. So I think sometimes we have to ignore the noise out there and just stick to the facts and get to the negotiating table. We'll get a deal done, and there's going to be a Canadian auto industry, but it's no doubt that it's a challenging time right now.
With that, I mean, everyone is aware of the job cut announcement that's happened over the last number of weeks, of course. But the mood and sentiment, has that sort of bottomed and now it's sort of stabilized? Hey, we'll hold things together, and there is opportunity coming up in the new year eventually. Is that what it feels like, or is it still, people are looking over their shoulder in the industry? Because a lot of people, these are families at the end of the day, no matter where they are in Canada. So what are you hearing from that group?
Well, I think I mean the sentiment, and obviously has been really, really challenging right now, because when you see layoffs and there's so much uncertainty for the sector, and we did think that at one point, by July, there was supposed to be a trade deal with the US where we were going to get relief on these tariffs. That date kept getting pushed out. And now here we are, and we're in a deep freeze because of the most recent flare up in Canada-US relations. So that makes things really challenging. But we're about to start this review of our CUSMA agreement, which all signs are that will be positive. We're also seeing the Americans back off on some of their own tariff policies because they've realized how damaging these tariffs are to their own industrial base. And just to give you a sense of what this is costing, so US automakers are anticipated to take a $188 billion hit on tariff costs over the next 3 years. That is unsustainable. You cannot have a successful industry when you're paying tariffs at that rate. That'd be equivalent to the US saying, we're going to raise the corporate tax rate to historical highs. They're just doing it through a different mechanism, which is through tariffs. So you've started to see some policies that are backtracking on some of the US tariffs. They've made allowances for steel and aluminum in the auto supply chain. And I think you're going to see more of that because it's just simply too costly and not sustainable. And that gives me hope because, we've always said that at the end of the day, these policies, these US policies are going to be borne by the US customer, and that will cause blowback. And, our estimates are that a car in the States is going to cost between $4,000 and $12,000 more because of the administration's tariff policy. That's not really a great pitch at the ballot box. And so I think as we get closer to midterms and the presidential, as those impacts are felt, I think people will start to have questions around, is this really the right approach? And that creates an opening for us to get a deal done with the US.
Have prices, sorry, Rich, have prices increased in Canada as well? I rarely buy a car, so I don't know what the market is right now.
No, so
are they increasing?
No, what we saw is manufacturers initially assumed that this tariff policy of the US was leverage to get deals done with other countries. So most companies have been absorbing these costs. And if you look at the reporting from the D3 and other companies over the past few months, everyone has been trying to avoid price increases. They've just been paying the tariff costs themselves on the assumption that the tariffs were about to go away. That hasn't happened. So now you're seeing costs being passed down through the supply chain. So you are going to see costs increase, but it wasn't immediate, and no one wants to be a first mover on increasing prices for obvious reasons.
Is that also because of sales? What are sales looking like this year in Canada? Obviously, my question to you is really I'm a housing guy, and I look at what the housing market is doing and how weak home sales are. And I imagine, purchasing a new vehicle is often tied to your wealth or your housing equity. And so what do auto sales look like this year in what I would call a borderline recession?
Interestingly, sales have held up. So typically we see about 1.8 to 2 million new vehicle sales in Canada every year. So far, they've held up. And the reason for that is a lot of customers are trying to get ahead of the tariffs. And so as all of, they're reading the news and they're seeing all this out there about cost increases or potential inventory shortages, a lot of people rushed their purchasing decision and pulled it forward. So the sales figures have held up. That said, I mean, all of the economic indicators are pointing to serious headwinds on the horizon. I mean, we're looking at what GDP growth of 1% at best in Canada, and a vehicle is your second largest purchase after a home. So if the economy continues on this path, we have to assume that sales figures are going to start to come down.
So I'm going to wait to buy my new car.
Yeah, wait for that trade deal.
So you actually answered my question, because I was going to push back on the whole, sellers absorbing the cost, because you can see, if you look at export price indexes for vehicles out of Japan, they've actually fallen a lot. But you answered my question in the sense that this is sort of a temporary measure. These Japanese exporters to the United States are basically absorbing that in hopes that there's like a reversal on those tariffs, and then eventually they're going to have to push those costs through in order to protect their margins, to protect their businesses. And so that's like a really interesting perspective I hadn't thought of. I don't know if I don't know if you guys have any other questions, but I've got one more.
No, I mean, well, Rich, I mean, I'm sure I know you were asking about just the state of the Canadian auto manufacturer sector, assuming the tariffs stay in place. Like, let's just assume there's no real great outcome here. Like, what is the future of the Canadian auto sector, assuming tariffs as they are today stay in place?
Yeah, so if tariffs remain in place, and there's just no pathway to finding some relief with the Americans, adding to an even more dire scenario, let's say that the CUSMA agreement, that review doesn't go well and the Americans withdraw from it. So now all of the investment certainty that we've had around our access to the US market is gone. I think there's a world there in which you see a smaller automotive industry that is more geared towards the Canadian market. Right now, when you look at a plant in the US, Canada, or Mexico, it's not there to service that local market. We have this integrated supply chain. So you build in Canada, but 92% of what we build here goes to the States. In a more protectionist world, this is going back to the Auto Pact in the 60s, what you could see is a scenario where everyone has barriers up, tariff barriers. Canada has responded to the US with our own tariffs, and manufacturers are then incentivized to keep as much production as they can in Canada. The challenge that we have with that, of course, is that, as I said, sales figures, we're 1.8 to 2 million vehicle sales in Canada per year. That doesn't justify that many assembly plants, because usually assembly plant builds one model, highly efficient at high scale. And, you're not, if you sell 140,000 F-150s, that could maybe justify a standalone plant. But there are very few other vehicle models that could justify a Canadian only vehicle assembly plant. So you could see a scenario where you have a smaller industry, less choice for consumers, higher prices. That's not a great outcome, but that's where this takes us if we follow the sort of protectionist thread right to the end. And that's why, again, I mean, feel like I'm yelling into the void on this, but protectionism is a terrible policy, and we've got so much historical data to show what happens when you pursue these policies. It's bad for everybody, but maybe we need to remind ourselves again why that's the case.
Is this because, I think people don't understand the degree to which you said you glossed over something. I just want to bring it back as how integrated our economies really are. And I know you work in for and with the auto sector, but is that true of many other industries that when you go to the tennis club and you meet the different the different president of the different industry sector guy? You know what I mean? You must have these similar conversations with your compatriots and your competitors.
Yeah, every single sector in the Canadian economy is so highly integrated with the United States. Like auto, of course, is the poster child. And we've always used that stat that a component could cross the border 7 or 8 times before it ends in a final vehicle. And that's because we've had these policies that have encouraged that integration, but it applies to every sector of the Canadian economy. And this is where I get a little bit frustrated with this talk about diversification. Don't get me wrong, diversifying your customer base is always important. And I used to work at Foreign Affairs and Trade on the trade negotiation side of things. And, the governments have made huge strides getting deals with Europe, and we've got the TPP agreement. So we have access to all these markets, but trade is dictated by the gravity model. you will trade the most with the largest economy that is closest to you. And we are very blessed to sit right on top of the United States of America. Now, that does create some exposure issues because all of our eggs are in one basket. But the idea that you could diversify away from America, it's never going to happen. That's just a fact of our geography. And so we are highly integrated. We have to find a way to work with the Americans. Sure, on the margins, you can try and find different markets. But I get a little concerned when we sort of try and convince ourselves that maybe there's another path. We could get closer to Europe or get closer to Asia. It's not a reality given where we happen to sit in the world. So we better find a way to work with the Americans or we're in big trouble.
Brian,
You've just been banned from Canadian
Yeah.
media circles.
I think we all share that view. I mean, that's
we
been
all
our
share
view,
that view. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing
even
that.
prior to the election and when all the discussions were going on around how to handle the United States, and yeah, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about how correlated we are there. But just to sort of summarize the conversation here, we appreciate your time. But I mean, to sort of summarize for our listeners, what if you were a betting man, putting chips on the wheel in Vegas, like how do you see the next 6 to 12 months playing out for the Canadian auto sector? Like what's your base case?
Well, a lot of it actually depends on government policy and what direction we see the federal government going in and how these discussions go with the United States. I see a world in which, and call me I'm a permanent optimist on this stuff, but I see a world in which we emerge from this current crisis even stronger. A lot of what the US policies are doing right now are very damaging and costly to their own sectors. So what should we do in response to that? Let's take advantage of that situation and position Canada as the most competitive jurisdiction in the world for manufacturing. I'm so tired of Canada always being on the back foot and responding to US policy. Think about what happened with the first Trump administration's tax cuts. We were caught out, we responded. Then you had President Biden come in with the Inflation Reduction Act. We realized that was going to cause a huge issue for us from a competitiveness perspective. So government introduced all of these measures to match the IRA. And now here we are with the second Trump administration and the one big beautiful bill and all these tariff policies. And again, we're scrambling to respond. What about a world in which Canada says enough with the reactive policies? We're going to be proactive. We're going to set a target and make Canada, from a regulatory and tax perspective, the best place in the world to invest and to manufacture. If we do that, we can come out of this stronger. So get rid of the EV mandate, an obvious self-defeating policy, which shockingly makes it illegal to sell the very vehicles we build in this country. Like, what kind of policy is that? So get rid of the mandate, put in place measures to make ourselves more competitive from a cost perspective. So that super productivity deduction that was introduced in the budget, step in the right direction, but we need to do more of that. And then lastly, of course, on the China front, we've got to keep the Chinese product out of this country and shore up our defenses against dumped products. So I think if we do those three things, we could be positioned to come out of this stronger and actually more resilient to policy changes in the United States. So that's where my optimism stems from. And I think there's a world in which we've got a thriving industry on that basis.
I think we're all rooting for that outcome. But Brian, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Loonie Hour. We'll probably have to have you back on in the near future once hopefully this all gets rectified through hopefully trade agreements and a re-upped Kuzma there. But once again, I want to thank you for coming on the Loonie Hour today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It was a great conversation.
It was super insightful. I really enjoyed that conversation. We weren't sure, what we were going to get with Brian. I mean, I didn't know a whole lot about him, but some of these guests, you're kind of going there blind a little bit sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I personally learned a lot and super insightful.
I'm going to get a Ford F-150.
Lightning.
No, not
So
the
I
Lightning. I want the gas Geisler guy, man.
So apparently, just to correct myself, I think I said 100,000 per truck. They don't actually. It doesn't look like they actually sorted out by model. But I think right now they're saying Ford in 2024 is losing around 45 to 50,000 per EV.
Yikes. Well, I thought that was a really cool conversation. I'm almost convinced it's a good idea to subsidize EV battery manufacturers. But one thing that we unfortunately we cut off the recording just to say goodbye to Brian and to thank him for his time. But he gave us the question I asked on the way out was how, is Germany's auto manufacturing sector gonna be okay? And I understand it's not his exact space, but he gave us a pretty dim outlook. And again, it's because for two reasons he said. I hope I don't misquote him. But one is the power situation, which we've talked about at length, which is obviously pivoting to Russia for natural gas, Russia invading Ukraine, U.S. blowing up Nord Stream, and obviously turning off the nuclear power plants, which has increased the electricity prices in Germany significantly. And manufacturing is extremely energy intensive process. And then also just the inability to compete on price with BYD and other Chinese EV manufacturers. And so he gave us a pretty dark or dim outlook on what's going to happen there. And, he's not quite sure. I think it's also really important to note how little they get paid on the assembly line there versus what they get paid in Ontario and other places. And I think it's happened before. He mentioned this. What is it? You expand, you increase capacity, you enter in a market, you dump the products, and then you sort of destroy that local industry. I mean, that's what's happening, I think, with EVs here and other countries. I think it's interesting perspective.
So one thing I wasn't too sure, Rich, I don't know if you know this, but I'm assuming like Canada's auto sector would have to pay the industrial carbon tax.
Yeah, of course, it's an industry.
Well, again, it's just kind of you reverse engineer all this and like, okay, so like all the cheap EVs are made in China where they pay basically very low wages. They're all government subsidized and they have really no environmental standards.
Coal.
Opening up a new coal power plant every single week in the country. And yet it's kind of like we want both things, right? It's like you want to have this auto sector here, but then you also want the environment. And I don't know. It's just you're trying to juggle the two things. But like, I mean, China isn't paying an industrial carbon tax.
No, hell no. 58% of their energy is from coal, and they're building hundreds and hundreds of coal-fired power plants. I can never.
Then you say, okay, well, we don't want any Chinese EVs, but then we also want cars, and we want them to be relatively affordable.
The reason it doesn't make sense is because it doesn't make sense. It's just not a cogent, streamlined view of the world. And what my old boss, sorry Keith, don't get jealous, used to say, what cannot happen will not happen. And this idea that we're going to deindustrialize completely and stop using fossil fuels and blah blah, it's just not going to happen. And so what it is now, we're just in a position where we're waiting for these ideologues to meet reality, and it's going to take a little longer than we had hoped, I think, but it will happen.
Speaking of which, there's a great article out this week where you remember it was a year ago, Rich, September 2024 to be precise. Then at the time, Canada's Minister of Energy, I think it's Jonathan Wilkinson.
Yeah.
He said, quote, oil and gas makes Canada poorer. And it will peak. Oil demand will peak this year. And that was back in 2024. So there was an article out today or this week from the IEA, which is one of the organizations that puts out all of these forecasts. And, we've argued for quite some time, and as has our guest Doomberg, that this is an organization that is ultimately politically captured. And they've been calling for really peak oil demand for years and years and years, and have continuously revised those forecasts. And their latest revision is now suggesting that oil and gas demand could grow until 2050. So again, I just, you go back to the comments from our former energy minister. Thankfully, I think we're making a turn in this country around the narrative, but the narrative under the former administration was there's no future for Canadian oil and gas.
Keith?
I suspect. What's this episode? What, 214?
213.
213. I suspect we get into the 400s, whatever it's going to be. This whole EV discussion, it will be unimportant. It will not be as important as it is now with everything. This pendulum has already started to swing back the other way. And, it's just me, but it seems like every policy decision in Canada, it starts first with climate, and then you get the knock-on effects from it. And the same thing with the Europeans, for example. And Rich, you commented the Chinese, they don't even put it in their decision
They
making.
don't give a shit. They don't give a shit about
And
it.
no one side is right and no one is wrong. It is what it is. But we've gone to the nth degree, and I think the Americans have shifted already. Of course, that's already happened, and this is going to change. So we'll continue with this conversation, but the belief that peak oil demand has peaked last year, or it's never going to be as important again in the future as it was, I think all that is going to be proven to be
Well, wait
a
a
little
second.
wrong.
There's some
2 years
context.
ago, there was no business case for Canadian natural gas to Europe
asshole.
and Japan, and I mean, it's so sad, It's just like this country with so much opportunity and prosperity that we could have that I think is ultimately just self-sabotaging itself.
Constantly. But just so people understand, the International Energy Agency wasn't always politically captured, right? So if I remember being like a little junior analyst working at BCA in Montreal.
You're
and it
still
was-
junior, Rich. You haven't gotten a promotion yet.
Thank you for that. But like we used to rely on it deeply. Like, there was the commodity strategy at BCA, there was the US investment strategy, and we'd pour through those websites, we'd pour through those reports, and they weren't politically captured. They had some great data, and they still do. That's the real sadness. And what we're seeing is, again, this ideology, which is this view that we must end fossil fuels across the board right now, versus the reality that they're 81% of global primary energy consumption. And despite the trillions of investment, that really hasn't budged in the last 10 or so years. And so, the refocus towards sort of, estimating what may or may not happen over the next little while based on reality and not this ideological capture, I think is a fundamental sea change. And again, I would just recommend people go and look up Xavier Blais, Blas. He's written a couple books many books on commodities. He's a journalist for Bloomberg, and he covers this both from like a numbers perspective as well as the shift in tone. And if you really want to get an understanding of what's happened in the IEA and those estimates with respect to fossil fuels, go and read what he's written about, because he's the guy. We're just sort of tourists in this world. He's the guy who really, really understands what's going on. And his view is very clear. The fossil fuels will be around for a very, very long time, and the IEA has finally sort of had their come to Jesus moment.
Yeah, but Rich, this is part of like that. Like, there seems to be like a theme or a trend that's developing, which is like, we talked about, was it a week or 2 weeks ago, Bill Gates' letter ahead of COP30, effectively saying like, listen, like we need to stop starving, the world of energy, and just focus on sort of, longevity first, and making these poor countries wealthier through higher standards of living that will ultimately prevent more, climate related deaths. So yeah, I think there's a big theme developing here. I mean, obviously you've seen Carney, I think even for a guy that wrote a book on this stuff and has written, started the Net Zero Banking Alliance, that's ended, and now we're hearing that there's supposed to be a pipeline announcement, ahead of the Grey Cup. So I think we're hopefully shifting in a different direction, and that seems to be the theme, anyways.
Just one more thing. I know we have to move on, but just one more thing. Like, people need to be able to hold two competing and seemingly contradictory views in their mind at the exact same time, which is one, that fossil fuel consumption, oil, natural gas, and coal consumption will almost certainly rise over the next 100 years. And at the exact same time, hold that little piece in your brain. At the same time, the share of total fossil fuel consumption as a percentage of your total energy consumption will likely fall as nuclear power has a resurgence, as hydro has a resurgence, as people put solar panels on every bloody square footage of roof in the world, and as wind becomes more important. So like those two things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, I think they're extremely, I don't know, complementary in a world in human beings which need energy to live and to breathe and to not breathe, but you know what I mean, to exist. Anyway, just something to keep in mind.
They will
One
all
final
coexist.
comment with the energy stuff.
No, we're done.
A little bit different is we really pay attention to what's happening between the Americans and Venezuela right now. There's been a lot of military buildup in the Caribbean.
Can you give us a quick rundown for people that aren't paying attention?
That was about as quick as I can go with it.
They're moving.
Yeah, go ahead, Rich.
No, they're moving aircraft. They moved an enormous aircraft carrier group. So whenever you move an aircraft carrier, there's like 30 or 40 ships that go along with it. They moved one out of the Atlantic and into the Caribbean Sea, specifically to address Venezuela.
And why are they addressing Venezuela?
Because Venezuela produces heavy or sour crude oil. And if you're a longtime listener of the Loonie Hour, you'll know another very important country, Canada, also produces heavy or sour crude oil. So, and the
United States wants that Venezuelan oil.
Right. And Venezuela has the largest crude oil reserves in the world at 320 odd billion barrels of oil a day. Sorry, a billion barrels. And they produce a pittance. They produce maybe 1 or 2 million barrels of oil, The U.S. produces light sweet crude, and Venezuela has heavy or sour crude, and you need the mix for all kinds of industrial applications. There you go.
Yeah, and this is being done under the guise of the drug trade, of course, that's coming out of Venezuela. And of course, politically, the two countries do not align either. Venezuela is not part of the American sphere and things. But this is something that, which catch our attention. And if it should escalate to a point where it is, doing a little bit of a kaboom, what happens with oil prices, Rich?
Fall.
Steve, what happens with oil prices?
They rise.
Yeah. And they go up. But again, we will never get around this conversation about energy in the world, no matter where it's coming from. And everyone will always want it. And, the Americans, they want to control energy. They don't want to be a net. I know they produce a different quality or type of crude oil, of course, relative to Canada and Venezuela. But once you become, once you own everything in the energy world, then you control a lot of other things around the world. So, Steve, what else are we going on with our last 4 minutes, maybe?
Yeah, run around here. We had the Bank of Canada came out with they basically released publicly their Bank of Canada deliberations. So they basically say, what were we talking about behind closed doors? I think these are ultimately manufactured, of course, but there was a unanimous view that a rate cut was essential to cushion the economy from tariff impacts. However, they did debate the timing. So some were pushing, some push for, of course, the October cut, which we got. There was a portion of them that were ultimately thinking they should push it further out. So, Rich, I don't know if there was anything else, other takeaways.
One really, really quick one, which is I think what Keith was going to say, but I'm going to steal it, which is towards the end of the deliberations, or the minutes is what they call them in the U.S. They call them, the deliberations here, is that they said, they agreed to be as clear as possible that they should communicate that based on their outlook, they believe the current policy rate is about the right level to keep inflation, blah, blah, through this period of structural adjustment. So to me, my interpretation of that is that they're absolutely done. They're absolutely done cutting interest rates. Short of basically an asteroid hitting, I don't know, the Grey Cup or something, there is virtually nothing that will convince them to change course. And I think that's a really meaningful and important discussion when we're thinking about mortgage rates and future policy and blah, blah, blah. That's my interpretation. I don't know, Keith, if you had a different view on that.
Yeah, two things with it. One, again, towards the end, the sentence that jumped out for me was they said monetary policy is close to the limits of what the Bank of Canada can do to support the economy. As Rich is suggesting, they're saying, hey, there's not much more we can do here. As we've already said, this is a fiscal and debt problem we have. However, they also said that GDP will be supported, not was supported, it applies in the future, the current time. GDP will be supported by housing and government spending.
That's not good.
Huh?
Won't be supported by housing. I can tell
It
you
won't
that.
Put my
be?
glasses crooked and look in. I mean, we all know the housing market is somewhat weak than it used to be.
Kaput.
And government spending, yeah, that's through the roof, of course. But it's, in a way, again, that's where we are with it here.
Rich, you want to quickly touch on the Canada jobs numbers, like high level? I don't think we need to go super deep into it, but obviously, huge bounce last month. I think back-to-back months now, like rising jobs. Carney's tweeting about it. Everyone's excited. Doesn't seem to pass the sniff test, but I'm curious what you thought there.
I mean, I'll give myself a plug. If you listen to the this week's IceCap Canadian Market App, I go through all the charts, so you can check that out if you want. But basically, in two sentences, one, it was positive, and two, it seemed very. It's like you're spreading your butter thin over the bread. Meaning, what I mean by that, it was all part-time employment growth, and part-time employment growth reflects a couple of things. One, it's they're lower wages, less productive, and more transient, literally part-time versus full-time. And I think that, we should be very, very careful about putting too much stock in these numbers, again, because the deviation, this is something Ben Rabideau has talked about a lot. I stole his chart and I showed it in the IceCap, which is the payroll number, which is simply accounting exercise, which takes longer to come out, but is more reliable, has deviated from the survey number. Maybe we should have him on to come explain that better. But basically, I don't know. There's something a little wishy-washy about these numbers, so you have to be careful about.
But the most interesting number from the payroll report was that one guy lost his job, and his name is Jason Jock.
What? Did he really?
Well, that's the guy with the who's the budget officer who's testified in Parliament. Yeah, the PBO. So Steve, do you want to share that story? And that'd be a good way to end the week.
Yeah, you guys, I think you guys are following that better than I do. So just confirming he actually did get fired.
Well, no, not technically.
Well, they announced his job. Put it that way.
Right.
Someone, okay, you tell. I wasn't following the story.
Yeah, so he's the gentleman that testified in Parliament.
Mm-hmm. He was the interim parliamentary budget officer.
Correct. And for the first time in a long time, there was a whole lot of truthiness coming out of someone in government. It was, but people remember, like, he had very specific adjectives to use to describe where Canada was headed from a fiscal and debt perspective, and they were not complimentary at all. A couple of weeks go by, and apparently his job is now advertised. And for the replacement, they specifically want someone who could have tact and discretion, which is another way of saying we want someone who's not going to criticize government. Guys, this is just shocking, for the government to come out and like one person comes out, and these are numbers. Like, it's not a subjective, I feel this way about something, I have feelings, and I don't have feelings, by the way. Rich knows that. But these are numbers. He was very factual on what's happening with the trend in them. And the fact that he did that, the current government, and this could have been the other guys as well if they were in power, they said, hey, we do not appreciate this. You are stepping aside, pal. We are getting someone who's going to, fall in line with what we want to see or say. Isn't that what you guys saw as well?
Yeah,
it's
ridiculous. It's Soviet era. Like, it's honestly, it's just, I know we exaggerated. We call people commies as sort of a joke, but this to me stinks to high hell. Honestly,
well, we all knew that guy was toast.
We knew he was toast, and we said it at the time that he was brave, and we Canadians owe him a lot of credit for coming out and saying it. But it was inevitable. Like, none of us, the three of us, were not surprised that he's getting the boot, right? No. Anyway.
No. I mean, anyways, well, Keith, U.S. government reopening or the government shutdown, I suppose, is over. Any quick final thoughts on that?
Well, the good news now for financial markets is that we're now going to get hard economic data coming from the Americans again. So we probably missed 2 employment numbers, 2 CPI numbers. I'm sure there were other data points that we just didn't get, and the markets had to guess what that data would look like using private sector reports. So that's over now. We're going to start getting hard data. I don't know what they'll do, if they're going to redo the previous ones and do a hard dump like a Netflix show. You get all the episodes at once. We'll see. But that's good news to have that over with from a financial market perspective.
We might soon be getting 50-year mortgages in the United States.
Oh God.
Trump has floated. So I don't know how that works from like a policy perspective in terms of like how they actually go ahead and like implement it. But effectively, for those that are not paying attention to it, the U.S. of course right now has 30-year mortgages. And we talked about it on the show, the U.S. home sales are right now tracking to have their fewest home sales since 1995. So the idea of the Trump administration to effectively get the housing market going, to stimulate it, and to make it quote unquote more affordable is to float the idea of bringing in 50-year mortgages. So going from 30 to 50. And this created a lot of debate online, of course. Interesting, to say the least. Imagine if you had those in Canada, people would be speculating to high moon.
Oh boy.
Well, remember now, when those are
give them an
issued,
idea.
the banks have to offload that risk a certain way, and there's no 50-year bond issued yet. Dun, dun, dun.
It's a 50-year
So-
mortgage, Jake. Why not just make it 100?
Why not
Might
1,000?
as well. I mean,
Don't they have
But I
100-year
think-
mortgages in Japan, though?
Yeah, they probably came out at the bubble. That's the point, right? I don't think they have a 100-year mortgage.
Man, Canada's like not very innovative. We need to figure this out.
30
will.
year
They will.
mortgages. How about this? You just pay to stay in a place, but you never own it.
and you will be happy.
All right, we'll chat about that another time. But as always, guys, hope that was insightful. We appreciate the support. If you got any sort of value, entertainment, enjoyed the show, all we ask that you share this episode with at least one friend, family member. Rate us, review us, Spotify, Apple. It all helps. And we'll see you next week.